Welcome to the New Jersey State Button Society first of three sessions on black glass buttons, and we're delighted that we can be instructed by Joan Lindsay and Simone Kincaid, author of the significant handbook, Black Glass Buttons, which is available at the National Button Society. Thank you so much, Simone. And let's hear about the history of black glass first.
Okay, so as you have already heard, this was given in 2015 in New Hampshire when the book came out. And we called this 3.0 because it was basically the third version of a black glass book that was done for the National Button Society. And we really didn't use the Blue Book classification numbers. We wanted to follow the major classes of the black glass classification. And for the most part, we used the Blue Book definitions throughout the handbook to prevent any changes that might contradict or confuse. We chose pictures that clearly represent each type, and many of the buttons do not fit neatly into the classification. And again, we didn't want to show examples that were going to confuse. So the first thing, we'll say, what makes glass black? Well, black glass is the result of adding either manganese, cobalt, charcoal, copper, or iron during the glass making process. Black glass on white paper should appear black to the naked eye, but depending on the composition of the glass, in other words, what materials it was derived from, black amethyst glass looks purple when backlit, but is still considered black glass. Black glass that is backlit and shows a dark ruby brown color or deep blue violet are also black glass, and none of these cast a colored shadow on white paper. However, true purple, ruby, or cobalt glass will. Now, all black refers to the absence of color, luster, or OME. Surfaces can be shiny, matte, or a combination of the two. And here you can see this one is matte and then shiny right here. This one's matte. One common question is, how can one tell the difference between Division 1 and Division 3 black glass? The answer: experience, back types, back marks, and overall appearance will help you determine the difference. For example, Division 1 buttons might exhibit hairline cracks, like this button right here.
Simone?
Yes.
For our newer people, would you explain the difference between Division 1 and Division 3?
Okay, Division 1 is pre-1919, or I think it's 1919 or pre-1917. And then Division 3 is made after 1919, generally after World War I. And then on this Division 3 button right here, you can see it's perfectly smooth. There's no irregularities. There was a higher quality of processing these buttons. Here you have this crude back with all these, irregularities and folds in the glass. So when you see something like this, you're automatically going to think, oh, that looks like a Division 1. And if you see this really perfectly shiny button, you're going to say, okay, that's made after World War I. So surface design and knowledge of fashion trends and styles will be another clue to their age. And here we have two buttons that are typical of their divisions. For example, it is important to note the details in your buttons. And here we have HMS Pinafore, HMSP, on this older button on the left, and it's from the comic opera, The HMS Pinafore by Gilbert and Sullivan, which opened in 1878. And that's one clue to its age. This Scotty dog is a typical Art Deco motif of the post-World War I era. And there are always going to be those that are difficult to discern. But if you see something like this, you're going to think, oh, that looks a little more modern, you know, and trust your judgment. When you start looking at a lot of these buttons, you're going to start, after a while, you'll be able to tell the difference between an older button and a newer button. So now we're going to get into the history part. So geography, war, and culture determined how glass technology spread from Mesopotamia throughout the Middle East and Northern Africa, then into Eastern, Central, and Southern Europe. Between 2500 BC to 300 BC, and based on archaeological finds, the first black glass objects were found in Iraq and northern Syria and were cast in sand, simple molds, and by hand. Pendant beads such as this one have been attributed to the Phoenicians of Mesopotamia. Between 300 BC to 500 AD in the Roman Empire, people along the Syro-Palestinian coast developed blowpipes and molds to create glass objects. Between 500 and 1450 AD, glass blowing technology reached parts of Southern, Central, and Eastern Europe, no doubt helped along by the Crusades. By 1000 AD, in the Northern Alps and regions of Bavaria, potash derived from burned trees was added to the glass. And you'll see this old 15th century engraving, and you can see here's this glass works, and they've got the images of the trees and a sand quarry, and then the glass works here below with the ovens. Now, this is images of Murano, Italy, and between 1450 and 1700, the first historical documentation of a black glass object made with a blowpipe is attributed to Andrea Vidaore, and forgive me, I probably pronounced that really badly. He was from Murano, Italy, and the date was 1526. So he wrote a book that documented making black glass objects with a blowpipe. The first black glass buttons made in Murano, Italy were made by lamp workers using canes. And this is during the 17th and 18th centuries. And at the same time in Bohemia, glass workers were making the first wound glass buttons by means of lamp work. The competitive trade secrets of Bohemians were their use of chalk and potash in their glass instead of lead. This resulted in intricate, engraved, faceted, and wheel-cut designs. By the mid-18th century, artists developed tools for press molding buttons, and by the 19th century, these molds were perfected for intricate button designs. And at the same time, Italy was renowned for its prized for its high-quality glass and lamp work, including cristallo, mosaics, and overlays. Great care was taken to protect these technologies, with espionage and intrigue running rampant. By 1700, or between 1700 and 1890, industrialization was important to the manufacturing process of buttons. In America, there were only a few glass factories in the 18th century, but by the mid-19th century, the number of factories increased and production tripled due to the invention of the pressing machine. The skills of glass engravers became as important as that of the glass blowers centuries before. In England, glass pinchers were working in Birmingham between 1687 and 1766. To make pinched buttons, glass rods were heated at one end and pressed into shape with a pair of long handled pliers equipped with a mold or a die. So here's one of these pliers, and you can see the image of the mold right here on the end. In America, by 1825, John Bakewell invented the pressing machine, which was later adapted for use by button manufacturers. And you can see here it's Bakewell's and Company. Destroyed by big fire, 1815. Ooh. Another historical point worth mentioning are these buttons excavated from a 17th century glassworks in Fichtelberg, Bavaria. They are nearly identical to those found on sites in North America. These are those buttons that have been excavated from a 17th century archaeological site in Maryland and Virginia, including 2 Native American sites. At last report, they have been compared stylistically and chemically and are now documented to be from Bavaria. And you can see this picture of this flower is identical to the one that was found in the Bavarian archaeological site. Here's another style of black glass button found in a 17th century Bavarian archaeological site, and side by side with one found in a burial at Jamestown Colony, dated between 1607 and 1624. The black glass button was found with 5 duplicates on a decomposed doublet with human remains. Mm. Okay, so this is going to be a different section of the book, and it's chapter 1 in the book. And we're going to talk about back types now. And if you do have your book, you could follow along a little bit. This was really the first area that Joan and I tackled when we did this book. And it involved hundreds of scans and running down information on all these different buttons. And thank goodness we had lots of volunteers to donate images to us. So why put emphasis on back types? Well, generally, early button makers were continually trying to improve efficiency and durability of their product and beat out the competition with a new patent. Sometimes buttons grouped by back types reveal interesting design similarities, and they can provide a clue as to the age of the button. And we include in the book a rough timeline showing a few back types and approximately when they were made. And we warn against trying to pinpoint age with that knowledge alone, since molds and shanks overlapped each other over time. So we have staple and loop shanks, and those are indicators of early 19th century. In the mid 19th century, we have swirlbacks. And you can see the swirl pattern in the back of the glass with the brass loop. And then by the late 19th century, the continued effort to improve durability can be seen in these examples. Hump and claw, and this is considered a claw. And this brass piece is called the hump. Here's a rosette shank, and these are real popular to collect. And you can see it's called a rosette because of these different numerous claws, you could say. This is a 4-way hollow box shank. And I caution you because this shank is found on modern buttons too. So that's where you really have to be careful. So when I say modern, I mean after World War I. Here's the loop and plate. And then the newer, some self shank styles. And there's a whole lot more listed in the book. Now, we decided to organize these into 5 basic categories and 1 for anomalies. We have metal backs, which include both open work and solid metal plates. And although they are back types, metal backs are listed under mechanical makeup in the classification. So I sort of want to, we don't want to talk about this right now because we're going to focus on the other types of back types, because we'll get to mechanical makeup later in one of the next sections. We discovered that some metal backs were applied and pressed into the button back while the glass was molten, thus not fitting the definition of mechanical makeup. Then we also discovered that some of the buttons we've called riveted in the past were made with various gauges of wire and embedded in pieces of glass and soldered or cut and spread to fasten them onto the back. Another interesting discovery involved pieces of black glass attached to various metal findings with heat. And this allowed for the individual glass pieces to be soldered to the metal button back. And Herman Bangaman of Texas broke quite a few of these open work metal back buttons for us so that we could determine how these were made. So you can see here, here's that little solder pin and the black glass piece is missing. And they were set into these, the pins were put into the black glass, and then the pins were put into this hole and they were soldered on the back. And Joan will correct me if I'm, after this is over. Okay, now this is costume trimming, and probably everybody has seen one of these with these really flimsy little black wires on the back of their black glass. And they are not a button, even though this has a button loop. You can see this little loop right here. This is not a button. It is costume trimming. And these just weren't capable of being buttoned and unbuttoned and buttoned and unbuttoned again. So for purposes of the National Button Society and the Blue Book classification, these are considered trim. So other back types that we covered are metal shanks, self shanks, and sew-throughs. And then included among examples of rarities are pad backs and thread backs. Now, this over here on the right, I'll start with this one on the top. This is a pad back that's actually set into the back of the glass. This button on the right is actually black glass mounted in metal, and it is not a black glass button. Even though it has this pad back and the black glass is on the front, this is considered black glass mounted in metal. And here we have a true black glass thread back, because this is black glass. This black edge here, this is all black glass. And here is the little metal piece that's inserted into the black glass in the back, and there's the threads. This one over here is mounted in metal, and I know it gets kind of confusing, but this is black glass mounted in metal, and it actually happens to have threads, real threads going across it. And you're kind of wondering, well, what's the difference? Well, the difference is that this black glass piece is actually set into this metal. This black glass piece is not set in metal. The metal is actually just around the thread piece in the back. Okay, so now we're going to switch real quickly to chapter 10 in the book, which is back marks. And because we decided, since we're talking about the backs today, it would be just as easy to talk about the back marks and mold marks. So this is one of my favorite things to look at. And I know not everybody feels the same way. This topic was barely touched on in earlier button books that were written. And so I felt like we really needed to touch on it a little bit. So this first slide is a typical group of letters and numbers and combinations. This first one is the number 10, and who knows, it almost looks like it's a 10-inch. But I don't know what this is. It could be a millimeter. I don't know what this little symbol is right here, but I know this says 10. And then this one is ED and probably stands for a company. I did notice recently that somebody else had shown a picture on Button Bites with a back mark of ED. And then here's a combination of letters and numbers. This says BB and 1997. And this is your classic modern Czechoslovakian glass button, and they come in black glass and clear and colored glass, and it's actually got the date that it was manufactured. Here are some mold marks, and we're just showing a few. Here you have 5 dots, and this one is a little Eiffel Tower with a circle, and at least it's an Eiffel Tower to me, maybe because I love Eiffel Towers, but that looks like an Eiffel Tower to me. And then this one has a grid line. It's just patterns of lines across the back. And then there are patents, copyrights, and registry marks. So if you haven't ever seen a British registry mark, this one on the top left is a British registry mark, and there are actual websites where you could look up the information, and there are keys to exactly what those symbols mean, and you can determine what the date of the manufacture of that button is. Then here's a costume makers, I believe. Let's see, what does it say? Or does it say something else? Whoops, sorry. Here's a patent, December, and then there's a date, and I think it says 1880, and Nouveauté patent, and Déposé, Paris. So these are just a few of them. And then you might want to look at makers' names, and occasionally you'll see a maker's names. Now, this one on the lower left says D&O, New York, and that could be the tailor. And these could have been made especially for that company. This is a Bimini back mark made in England with the little potted plant. And then we have Lamode. And then I'm not sure, Dard and Brothers Manufacturing Company, or Goddard, is it Goddard? Goddard and Brothers Manufacturing Company. And it says Newark, New Jersey. Hey, isn't that appropriate? So there are lots more different makers' names and back marks. And you just have to look for them. So I'm going to stop here. And that's the end of the first part.
So Simone, we're going to give Joan a chance to weigh in and see if she has any additional things, but I'm going to suggest that everybody go to gallery screen. Hello, Deb, good to see you. And we have a couple of relatively new collectors on here, actually not that many, but there are some pretty basic, just amazing questions to be had, and then we can also go to the more arcane ones. First of all, I want to say to everybody, the introduction, the history part is not really in the book. So what you just saw with all those wonderful illustrations is Simone's fabulous archaeological research. And the reason why it's fabulous is, duh, she is an archaeologist. And so she brings that to us. So we're especially grateful for that, and especially grateful that this is being recorded so we can go back and think about each of these pictures a little more. I'm thrilled about that. So thank you very much for your point of view and your extra addition to this wonderful book, which is available at nationalbuttonsociety.org. Okay, we're opening for questions. Joan, how about, do you have anything particular to add before we proceed?
Well, no, I think Simone covered all the bases. Of course, today she's covered her part of the book. she's done the the history was especially important to her, and she did a wonderful job of the research on that, and also the back marks, because she and I went round and round and round on that, because I said, who cares? But she did. And so
Look here someday.
Probably do too. And I will kind of reemphasize that sometimes it is difficult to tell the difference between Division 1 and Division 3 black glass. Simone covered the basics on how to tell the difference, but sometimes I don't know, and I think you just have to use your best judgment, and if in doubt, in competition, I would put it in Division 9 and not take a chance on a measle. Also, I just wrote myself a little note that this is just kind of a side from the book, but I always tell people to use this black glass book in identifying techniques for clear and colored glass, as well as black glass, because we've covered the basic techniques and they, for the most part, apply to both. Mm-hmm. I understand there's a clear and colored glass handbook in the works, but until it's published, I always recommend using the black glass. So, questions?
So I'm going to ask Rebecca and Helene and maybe Kelly and even Barbara Wolfgang, because you are among our newest collectors, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but what in this presentation astounded you that you hadn't thought of asking about before? And if there's anything, so you don't have to answer now, but be thinking about that, because that's something that we more experienced collectors need to think about as to how we present button collecting. So maybe it's the fact that something has a back mark is unusual, or that we're considering, how to identify an earlier button.
I see Pam's hand up.
I don't have a question, I have a comment, and it's really for the new collectors. the world of black glass buttons is very large, and it is a wonderful way to start collecting buttons. Many are very affordable, and it's fun to find them. So I just wanted to mention that, because going to a button show can be overwhelming, be thinking about how to begin collecting and what to collect and so on. So I just wanted to mention that.
That's really wonderful comment. And Annie Fraser just gifted us with a slew of black glass buttons to use in recruiting people who never thought of collecting black
Cool.
glass. So, you know, what is your opinion of what little small glass buttons are if on the open market? I know they're hard to sell, but so I'm taking the 5 random buttons that I picked out of this slew of buttons, and sure enough, there's 2 or 3 different kinds of back marks, and each one has a different face type. But just generally, what does a small glass button retail for? Somebody answer me. Are they like 10 for $1, or
No, more than that.
Well, if it depends upon their age, and it depends upon if they're modern, and if they're smalls, yeah, 10 for, yeah. It just depends. If they're
So-
pictorial, they could go anywhere from $1 to $5 a piece or more. It just depends if they're older.
okay. So
There's a huge wide variety. Faceted black glass is really common. Modern faceted black glass is super common, and you don't want to have to pay a lot of money for that.
but the older buttons, the division ones with something interesting on the front, would be $1 a piece, 50 cents a piece, $2 a piece.
Annie, go.
Anywhere from like a quarter to $4 or something.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah.
It could, you know, again, they could be 10 cents, they could be $2 or $3. So, you know, when you have little pictures on them, people might want to collect them for what the front picture is.
Okay, well, thank you, because this does give us chances to give away, and so I put 5 buttons in Barbara Wolfgang's mailbox, and maybe that's what brought her to us today.
Yay. Cool. How fun.
Helene, I'm going to bring some black glass to your meeting tomorrow night.
Oh, good.
Eve-
I have a question.
Mhm.
In what little of a collection that I do have of black glass, I just happened to look at the backs, and I only see one that's not really smooth on the back. So I'm guessing that would be a division 1. It's got the lines going through it in the back.
Well, and you want to look for groove, the needle grooves. The longer the needle groove, if it's a narrow, long needle groove, generally it's an older button. If it's got just this small self shank that's perfectly formed and it's kind of angular, generally those are modern. It really does depend, but
Right. Well, this isn't a self shank. It's got a metal shank, and I can see actual lines, long lines,
let's see if
centering from the center. I
let
don't
me
know
see if I can
tell.
let me see if I can
And I think
spotlight
you
you.
can see. Can you see the texture? It's not completely flat. See, it's
That's
got
probably
lines.
an older one.
Yeah, it looks old.
It looks
Okay.
old.
The other ones are completely smooth. So this is the oldest one I have then.
Mhm.
So this would be
What's the front
oldest.
look like? Now, see, you have to
It's all
use-
faceted. It's not really that old then, right? Look at
Oh,
it.
no, it is.
no, that's an older one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's almost verging on that old lacy glass, but see, you have to use, it's more than just the back, it's more than just the shank. You have to look at the design and the pattern and the style too. So there's different art styles through time, and you're going to see a difference between a Victorian button and an Art Deco or a mid-century modern button.
Okay.
Simone, I don't know what you mean by needle line.
That's what I wondered too.
The needle grooves.
Thread groove,
So-
thread
Thread
groove.
grooves, sorry.
But that's for
Thank you, Annie.
that's a self shank, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
So if there's like a long, I showed one in the pictures,
I didn't,
and I think they're shown in the book. I know they are. If you have really long and it goes across the back of the, almost entirely across the back of the button. Yeah, like that.
big one. This is a long one.
Okay,
But
I'm gonna,
It's very smooth. There aren't a lot of grooves in the back, but it's a long opening though, or it's a long,
right, and so you have to look at the front.
okay.
So what's the front
It's
look like?
faceted, it's faceted and shiny.
And that would be one of those that's on the border. On the cusp.
So, oh, okay, all right.
Well, the looks of the shank itself looks sharp and more
Right.
modern.
So hold it up again.
Okay,
See, the shank is really sharp in the center.
right.
It's more sharp. If it's more smooth and rounded, right, Joan?
Yes.
A little smoother. So
But it looks
that
like
one
it's-
is like, that's one of those that's hard to tell.
Yeah.
It figures, okay. All right, thanks. Well, it's good to know. It's an in-between.
It's an in-between. And you know, collectors call them transitionals, and that's where you would use it on a division 9, which includes both division 1 and division 3. So the
Okay.
old and modern, and then you're
All
safe.
right. Okay, all right, thanks.
so Rebecca Winter, I'm looking at you, looking at your black glass buttons. Meanwhile, I'm looking at the 5 glass buttons that I just took at random, ready to give away to somebody, and then didn't. So of the 5, one is modern. It's got a seriously smooth, come on, a seriously smooth
Back.
back, I think.
That
And
loop doesn't look modern though.
Mhm.
Well, that's what I wondered, but it's also just faceted, right? And you think that the shank looks old?
Yes.
Yes,
Metal. It's a metal shank, first of all.
yeah.
Well, okay, so I'm used to looking at these metal shanks and thinking that they're old. This one is smaller than some of the others. Isn't the shank really one of the first best ways to tell the age of a button?
Well, you could say yes, but as Simone brought out, it takes more than just the backs. It takes the glass itself, the design. It just takes practice looking at a lot of buttons.
Great.
And after you've looked at a whole bunch of them, they begin to take on a look.
Yeah.
We always laugh and say, I knows them when I sees them. And that's about all we
It takes
can-
looking at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of buttons. I mean, just, you know, going through, like having a collection of black glass and starting to sort. And, you know, you'll start sorting them based on what you see. You know, oh, this is a metal wire loop shank. This is a metal wire loop shank with a plate. This has a claw. This is a, you know, this has a rosette. This has four prongs. It's a hump. So you start sorting them out, and then you'll flip them over, and then you start looking at the fronts too. So there's, or you'll see the swirl backs. You'll sort out the swirl backs. So it takes practice. And I recommend that everybody get their black glass out and just start trying to get a feel for it and sort them out and see what you see.
I have another
I
question.
also save
Oh,
out all my,
What-
any
what-
back
what-
marks.
What a great riff. We have 2 people with their hands raised. Hang on, Helene.
Okay,
Pam and Jade. Pam?
If you can spotlight me, when Simone was mentioning faceted black glass, this, I
Someone can do
think,
that. Uh-huh.
I'll try and angle it. It almost looks like a quilt pattern. If you can think of, can you see the different facets?
Yes.
So those are plentiful, and this is a division 1. It has the loop and plate shank,
Mm-hmm.
and it's real ripply in the back.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, there's thousands of these faceted black glass.
Now, a modern one can still have a looped plate shank, but if it's
Mhm.
really super smooth on the back, that usually kind
Yeah,
of leans you
right,
towards the modern.
right.
Thank you.
Okay.
So Jade,
Thanks for the great presentation. I just wanted to ask, I was really interested in those thread back and wondering what the approximate dates for those thread back buttons were.
Old. I would love to have one.
Yes, they're
talking like-
very rare. Annie might know more. I'd say early 1800s.
Okay.
I would think so. I mean, it's a pretty bad idea when you think about it. You can't imagine.
Yeah.
They're very hard to find, and you can
It was
understand why they
short-lived.
didn't survive. I don't know who
Yeah.
thought that was a good idea, but
Well, I'm gonna go look at my early 1800s clothes now and see if I've got
Oh,
any.
man. They are I think they're pretty rare.
yeah, they're
Mhm.
extremely rare.
They're
Yeah.
really cool.
so Jade among us is a textile and fashion curator of the Thomas Jefferson. What's the official name of your museum?
It's the textile and costume collection at Thomas Jefferson University.
Right.
Ooh.
So she comes to button collecting directly from the costumes themselves. And
Yeah.
So thank you for that question.
You bet. Thanks.
So Helene, you had another question?
I had a really odd situation, and I saw an example of one of the pieces that I had questions on. On the back, if you look at the shank on the back, usually they're 90 degrees from the surface of the back. Why are some shanks almost parallel with the back of the button?
They've been smashed.
Pardon me?
Is it bent?
It's been almost complete. Is it just because it was damaged?
Yeah.
Or was it made that way, or what?
It's probably damaged, don't you
Okay.
think, Joan?
Every once in a while I get one of those and I didn't know whether it was made
Yeah,
that way
be
or
really careful, because if you try to bend them back, a lot of times,
break
I
it
have a
off.
special tool that I use, but it's like, I can't tell you how many I've broken trying to fix them.
Okay, I just wondered if they were.
And
Okay.
yeah, you're better off leaving it alone.
Okay.
Well, if
Fine
you
with
can,
me. Okay, thanks.
if you can pry it up, if it's so flat,
Gradually.
you can't get a button wire under
Right.
it. Sometimes I'll just very gently with a kitchen knife or something, just bend it enough so that I can get the wire under. Yeah.
I stick my awl, I kind of nudge it in and just try to gradually pry it up to be able to get a wire in.
All right, thanks a lot.
This is so exciting to have both novice and expert questions on the same session. And although we can still take more questions from us including me, who are sort of beginners to this, who among you fancy experts has a question now?
Where can I find a thread back?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had a black glass thread back. Once had a color glass paperweight thread back,
Wow.
which was
I think-
very, very rare, but I don't
many
think I've ever had a
beads
black
are-
glass one.
How many beads or how much glass has to be on the thread back to make it a black glass?
Well, the
'Cause I
whole front
do
of it
have
is,
some-
The whole front.
the whole
the
front is
whole
black.
front?
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
It's not,
I
yeah.
have some that just have a little piece of black glass like in the middle, or I have some that have beads all over them.
Well, I showed that example where it's
Yeah.
primarily all black glass, but there's that little metal rim around the edge.
So it'd be an OME then instead of a,
It's black glass set in metal.
So would anybody like to see those particular pictures again, if you could, Simone? 'Cause I
I
think
could-
that's one of the confusing things for both beginners and experts is
Okay.
what constitutes a button where you think it was a material, but actually it's set in metal. And I've got a lot of confusion.
Okay, I'll see if I can go back to that.
Well, while she's looking, I will also add, one of the pad backs we showed is intermixed. And that, we'll talk about that in a later session. But just to be aware that there is black glass intermixed.
I'm trying
And
to see if
this-
I can find it.
And while you're waiting, you've been running through this costume trim, and Susan Freeman,
Here we go.
you came on a little bit later, and you and I were both wondering about costume trim things that we find in people's boxes that give us their buttons. And Simone's definition of costume trim is something that would be too unwieldy to use regularly as a button, and that's a
It's
wonderful definition.
Very, very thin wire.
Yeah, but it could be anything. I mean, the costume trim things, even if it has a shank, first of all, it has to have a shank, right?
No,
No, to be a button? Well, it has to
oh,
be,
to be a button, yeah.
Yeah,
to be a button, but if it has a fastening or a shank and is kind of kooky, maybe it isn't a button because it would be too difficult to use.
do you want me to go back to that one, or?
No, I
Okay.
was just making conversation while you were getting it up.
Okay,
Okay.
so this is a true black glass pad back on the top left. So you see it's all glass on the front and the back, completely. And this pad back is like this little piece of metal that has the canvas. They were actually, these flexible canvas shanks were designed in about, I think it was between 1820 and 1840s. Joan, correct me.
I think so. I think the 1834 kind of pops into my mind,
Okay.
but I could be wrong.
And they were called a flexible canvas shank. And it's inserted into the back. Almost like it's like a swaged in shank, like in the backs of pearls, where it's pressed in, and then that is held in place. The metal
Simone,
ring holds it in place.
why is this considered black glass when it looks like intermixed glass?
Okay, Joan, go.
Well,
That's why I had my hand up too. So
yeah,
I put my
well,
hand down.
that's, like I said before, we'll be covering the intermixed glass later. But the fact that there is part of the shank, at least, is in black glass, classifies it as black glass, even though there is white glass intermixed. Now, there could be people who would argue with that,
Okay,
but
thank you.
that is the information we were given when we were writing the book.
Thank you, okay.
So to break this down for novice collectors, basically the button is the material that we see on the back usually. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Now, the one on the right, we see black glass on the back.
No,
Oh,
that's tin. That's black tin that's been Japan.
Oh, okay.
The
all right,
glass is only on the front, and
okay.
this is actually set into metal, and it is a flexible canvas shank or a pad back.
Okay, all right. I thought that black was glass, but the takeaway for us new people is unless there's an exception, and at some point we ought to list all the exceptions. Unless there's an exception, the button material is determined by what is on the back.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. And you don't see any glass on the back of this.
Okay.
It's absolutely, it is a glass set in metal. So
Mhm.
now the next one, let's see if I can go to the next one. I don't know if it's going to let me now. There we go. So here's that thread back. So
That we all wish we had.
yes, oh,
never
yeah.
saw that either. yeah.
And this is all completely glass. It's like that previous one that was a pad back, except for its threads. And this one is actually showing the little metal piece that holds those threads into the back of the glass. It's like it's pressed in there. And
Don't you
that
think
holds
it
it
had
in.
to be machine made?
that has to be done by machine or some sort of a stamp or some
Yeah,
sort of a
because I took
a pressure
the
machine.
thread back apart. It didn't have glass on the front, and it was very bad shape on the, the front of it. It was the fabric button. I took it apart, and there was no way somebody could do it by hand. I just
Right. So
don't know
then
how it can
this
be
one on the right, again, here has that metal rim. So this is considered glass set in metal, and it is a thread back. So it's not a black glass button. The one on the top left is.
Well, this is
Does
such
that
a-
help?
How does that black glass get on top of those threads?
This,
machine put it together. Yeah.
there's a depression in the back of the glass.
Is it just set on? Okay.
And it's pressed into this with probably with a tool or a
Okay.
machine.
Now, you're going to have questions like this, and sometimes all we can say is we weren't there.
Right. Thank you,
I get it.
Joan.
I get it. That's a great answer.
Wonderful.
I was going to try to go back to that, the trim again. There you go. So see how these little black glass pieces are welded or soldered to the wire? And there is a very, very thin wire loop. This is kind of a rare case where this really does look like a button, except for those the really thin wire. And many times these trims don't have loops like this, or they'll have several of the loops. So
Okay.
this is costume trim and not a button.
Okay, that's a
Does that
very good
help?
definition. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So
I'm gonna stop
It
there.
is, we have been at this for a little over an hour, and I want to honor everybody's time. Does anybody have another burning question or any kind of question? And again, the good news is that we are going to be able to look at this again. I'm thrilled at. But it's such a special privilege to be online with people who have been studying this for years, and to get their expertise along with our newer collectors. I see Pam with her book. I want to tout the book again because it's a wonderful resource.
So next time we're going to talk about construction, right?
Yes. Next time we are going to ask you to sign up. So I will send everybody on this call. I'll be able to figure out everybody's, right now in the chat, put your emails. Everybody put your emails, and then I'll use that so that you will be sure to get an invitation to sign up, because we are going to ask you to register for the next two.
We're going to get into the nitty gritty.
If you're not from New Jersey, give me your email. I have all the emails from New Jersey. If you're not from New Jersey, then please give me your email. And we're so happy that we're able to share this with Simone and Joan.
The next date is?
The next date, thank you. Good choice, Pam. We are skipping a week. So the next day is October 30th, Mischief Night.
Mhm.
And we were talking about postponing a week because they have a mild conflict with the National Button Society board meeting. But I
We're
think we
okay.
decided just to keep going on with it.
And everybody, don't forget, next weekend starts the Fall Button Fest. There's going to be several really great programs online, and the Button Boutique starts on Wednesday. You can start buying from the Fall Button Boutique on the 19th.
And there are two programs on the weekend on the National Button Society on how old are my buttons. I think one is a general one and one is paid. Yeah.
Sally Gibson's going to also do a thing on how to tell makeups.
Mm-hmm. Right. Any more questions before we go? I'm thrilled to see everybody and have a wonderful, wonderful